Alright, so the next thing that we really need to talk about before we get too much further is how we handle line weights in AutoCAD. So whenever we're using Revit for architectural drawings, it automatically does a lot of the line weight work for you. And the whole idea is whenever you're drawing walls, they want to show up darker than the dimensions that are going to be dimensioning those walls. You want a very distinct line thickness difference between those two different types of lines. Same thing goes with text and other different annotations. So in architectural drawings we end up with a lot of different layers. Sometimes the drywall has a layer, its own layer. All the electrical and plumbing, they have their own layer, and it gives you the ability to control the drawing very well and make it look nice whenever it's printed out. So the thing that we have to keep in mind is whenever we're actually going to print this out, we're still going to be printing this with just black ink. We're not going to be printing this in color. So to this point we've gone through and we've set up different layers with different colors. So it hasn't just been random, even though it seemed like it has been. Basically what we're doing in AutoCAD is we're going to use a plot style table to define the line weights. So there's a few different ways that we can do line weights, and I could just type in line weight and see what it gives me. And whenever this comes up, I can go through and choose different line weights. I can set line weights for different layers. I could set line weights for individual lines. Well, that ends up becoming a lot of work each time that you do a drawing, and it's a lot more difficult to manage in an office setting where everyone should be using the same layers and the same line weights for all the different drawings that they do. So instead of doing it that way, we're going to right click anywhere on the screen, choose options, and whenever this options menu comes up, there's a plot and publish, and over here at the right, plot style table settings, and we have up at the top default plot style behavior for new drawings. We're going to use color dependent plot styles, and specifically the one that we've created is arc drafting, CTB. Now we could go ahead and look at this and try to open these files just to see what they look like. We'll click on this AutoCAD CTB, and whenever I do this, basically this dialog box comes up, and I can go through all of the colors the whole way to 255, and I can tell it how I want any single color to look like whenever it's printed. So whenever I'm looking at this and I say I see color number 30, the color, I could make it so that whenever I use color 30, it prints out green. I could, and typically I just use object color, and there's some grayscale options. We have a couple of layers set up with grayscale, some screening. The line type, I usually use object line type and handle line types like center lines and hidden lines within the layers. The one that I really want to pay attention to is use object, or for the line weight. So this is defaulted to use object line weight. So whenever, and it basically does that for all of these. So the whole way down, magenta, white, it says use object line weight. So if I close out of that and I open up the arc drafting CTB and look at it instead, whenever I choose color 1 or red, under line weight, now all of a sudden the line weight is 0.018 inches. Yellow is 0.02 0.22 inches. That's the thickness of the line. So just starting out, that doesn't mean a whole lot to you. So the easy way to start to understand this is to have a visual to look at to get a better idea. So whenever we look at the actual ARC drafting CTB file, what's printed, this is what it's going to look like whenever it's printed, whenever I'm specifying and using that file. So a red line is going to come out this thickness, 0.018 inches. Yellow line is going to come out this thickness. If I want a thick, heavy line, like for a title block, I may want to use cyan, which is 0.03 inches. If I want a very, very thin line, like for control joints on a foundation plan, slab layout, I might want to use color 15, which is only 0.002 inches thick. If I want to use text, I typically use magenta or 193 for all of my text. So as you get used to this, it becomes second nature what color you're going to use for what different layers and what different objects you're going to have on your drawing. So just to look at that in this view, this is what I actually plotted out to get that other drawing. So whenever we go to our garage drawing and look at it, we have a better idea. We have color number 10, which is 0.002. So this is going to show up thin and light. These are going to show up thin as well. The green lines, the foundation, the lines that represent the foundation, they're going to show up much thicker, but still not very thick like a cyan line that you'd use for the border. So that's the rationale for why we're using different colors for different objects. So the next step is to actually create a text style. So whenever we go to the Annotate tab at the top, the default text style is standard. And I can click on that standard and then click on this Manage Text Styles, and this dialog box shows up. I'm going to click on the Annotative text style, and I'm going to set it current. So basically what annotative means is it means that whenever I change the scale of the drawing, it's going to change the size of the text accordingly. So I don't have to constantly be scaling up all of my text if I change the scale of my drawing. I don't have to determine the size of my text up front either. It's going to do that math for me and figure out how high it has to draw the text in AutoCAD so that it shows up this paper text height. So instead of using Arial, which is a true type font and has a thickness, could end up showing up very thick and dark on the drawings, we're going to use an SHX font called Romans. So I choose that. I make sure that this annotative box is checked. Paper text height, I want the paper text height to be 0.125 or 1/8 of an inch. If we start drawing things, adding things to our drawing, and we find out that 0.125 or 1/8 of an inch is too high and too crowded, we could always go down to 3/32 of an inch as well. And this Romans font is kind of wide, so we can take the width factor down to 0.85 and clean it up a lot. So I'm going to say apply and close. So I just created a text style. So if I want to actually add some text in, there's a couple different ways that I can do it. I can come up here, still on my annotated tab. I can choose on multi-line text is the default, and this is basically set up if I want to do multiple lines of text to describe something. I can also choose single line text. So whenever I use single line text, the first thing it's going to ask me for is a starting point. Text specifies start point. So I'm just going to click, I'm going to zoom in, I'm going to click right here as my starting point. And then it's going to ask me for my rotation angle. I just want to leave this as 0. And after I hit enter, now my text dialog comes up and I can just type in control joint, and I want all of my text to be capital letters. So I'm going to say control joint, enter, enter, and there I have some text. So I don't actually want to call this control joint. What I'm going to do instead, I'm going to double click on this to edit that text, and I'm going to type in CJ. Control joint, cut joint, and then I'm just going to copy this around to different locations. Showing where those control joints are, or calling them out. So that's a very, very simple way of adding text to the drawing. So the next way that we can start adding some text, a lot of times what we want to do is we want to have leaders. So there's a multi-leader button up here. There's a few different ways that we can add leaders and draw to leaders and text to the drawing. We're going to start out with this multi-leader. So whenever I click that, it basically wants me to select a point for the arrow, for the arrowhead. So I'm just going to go ahead and do this and see what happens. Turn my ortho off, and I'm going to type some text. And what happened is it made the text extremely small, it made the landing extremely small, and it made the arrowhead extremely small. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that there, and I'm going to click multi-leader again, and this time I'm going to choose my options. Now that I chose options, I can come down here, I can specify the leader type, the leader landing, content type, max points, so I can do a lot of different things there. I can also come up here and click on this little arrow, and it'll bring up this dialog box. And this is really where I want to do my settings. It gives you a nice visual representation of the settings that you're changing. So I'm going to click on annotative again, which means that it's going to scale up those features whenever my scale changes, or for the scale that I currently have. And I'm going to set that current, and then I'm going to modify it. I get another dialog box that comes up, and I'm just going to start off on the left-hand side, the leader format. So I want a straight, not a splined option, so it's going to give me straight lines instead of curved lines. I want the color to be by layer. I want the line type to be by layer. And that means whatever layer I draw this on, that's what color it's going to assign to it. And I want the line weight to be by layer. So I'm handling all my features with the layer options instead of doing it individually for each individual object. I'm going to let the arrowhead be closed filled, and I'm going to make the arrowhead size 3/32 of an inch, and the leader break size, I'm going to leave that at 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to move on to the next item, maximum leader points. I'm going to do 2. I don't want more than 2 segments to my leader. I want one that is pointing away from the object that you're pointing at, and then a landing. The landing settings, that is this part right here that goes to the text. I'm going to automatically include that, and I'm going to choose a landing distance of, we're going to start out with 0.125 or 1/8 of an inch, and then modify it if that doesn't look good. Our scale for these multi-leaders, we're going to leave that annotative box checked, and that's going to give us the feature that it's going to scale these up automatically for the scale of our drawing. Next, the Content tab. So we can do other things other than text. We can do blocks, which we won't talk about right now, but basically blocks give you a lot of different options for adding things to these multi-leaders. We're going to start out with our M-text. The text options, the default text, we're not going to have any default text. I'm just going to hit escape. Our text style, we are not going to leave this as standard because we went through and created our text style earlier for annotative. So we change it to annotative, and you can see that it changes the font also because the font is built into the text style. So annotative, you can see I talked about standard was using Arial font, which is a true type font. You can see that this has a really thick feature to it. If I change this to annotative, where it's using the Romans font, it's single line. That's what we want. The text angle, we're going to keep it horizontal. Text color, we're going to choose bilayer for this as well. Text height is automatic because it's annotative, so it creates the 1/8 inch text. Not only because it's annotated, but because we're using a text style that already established the text height. And up here, or down here, we have leader connection. We're going to do a horizontal attachment at the middle of the top line for both left and right attached text. And we'll leave that landing gap at 330 seconds and see how it looks. So once we have all these things set up, we're almost done. I can close that. Before I actually start drawing anything, I want to make note that I am still on the S-cut joint layer. So what I want to do now is -LA, enter, M for make, and I'm going to make new text. I'm going to call this S-text. I'm going to make the color magenta. Hit enter a couple times, get out of that command, and now I have this as my current layer. So now whenever I come up here and I go back to my annotate tab, and I choose multi-leader, it should look different. So if I draw this here, click there, and add some text, and click off of that, now the text is the correct size, this arrowhead is the correct size, and then I can just double click on this and change it as need be. And that's the best way to add text to the drawing, the easiest way.